It's funny that we talk about the dark places and how God wants us to bring light, and yet some people look at the church in a sense of fear. I remember not that long ago, I think it was Peter mentioned to me that he had some parents of youth that came to pick up their kids from youth, and they wouldn't walk inside the door of the church because they were afraid that they would get struck by lightning. Not sure what actually precipitated or what was inside of their life that allowed that emotion to come up, but there was this sense that the church is a scary place, and God somehow exists in this place, and you can't walk in the building without God. It's almost like a holy of holies. Now we know that that's not exactly how God works. That's not exactly how, this isn't like the temple in the Old Testament, because rather we are the temple of God, and God infills us and fills us with His Spirit. And so this isn't any different place. And so we're, as you know, as a church, we open up our doors for all kinds of things to happen here for community use and so on. But a lot of people have these walls. They put up these walls around themselves, and they keep their distance from people. Not just us as believers, but from everybody. From each other even, from family members, because they're not sure what to do with what's going on inside their life. In India, they have caste systems where they have different levels of society, and there's the rich, and then the upper middle class, and the lower class, or the lower middle class, and the lower class. They have all these different lines that are drawn in the sand, that they know that so-and-so can't talk to so-and-so because they're different. And they're a different part of society. It's almost like they're in a part of a different country. And yet that's not how God intended it to be. But as you look around, I mean, you think of your own life. We all have disappointments. We all have fears. We all have brokenness. We all have pain and suffering that we have in our lives in some way, shape, or form. We've all faced issues of bondage to certain types of sin that we just kind of feel trapped into, and we just feel like, that we all have that kind of brokenness a part of our life. And if I were to ask you to raise your hand as to how many of you feel that way and have had, or at least some point in your life have felt that way, how many of you would raise your hands? Most of us would probably raise your hand. I would probably suspect everyone, if we were really being honest, would go, yeah, I've messed up, I've blown it, I've had experiences in my life that has caused incredible pain to me personally. Maybe I've caused pain to people. We're broken people. All of us in this room are broken people. And as you look beyond outside the walls, what percentage of the people in our community do you think are broken people? 5%? 10%? What percentage? 100%. Everybody you bump into, everybody you have a conversation with, whether they're at the gas pumps, whether they're in the grocery store, whether they're your co-workers, whether they're the spouse of your co-workers, everybody has some aspect in their life where they have put up a wall that has kept people from getting very close. And God says no. Jesus came to tear down those walls. He came to tear that down so that we could have life with one another. That we could really experience life in a fresh new way. Jesus was asked the question, so what's the greatest commandment? What's the one thing God wants us to do above all else? And Jesus says, well, there's not really one, there's two. In Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31, we've probably all heard this a number of times. Jesus said this. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second one, he says, there's two. Because it's not just about our relationship with God. There's this horizontal relationship, this that connects us with people beyond us here. And he said the second one is this: love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, all of us here love ourselves. You know why? Because you all changed your clothes from yesterday. At least I'm thinking you did. How many of you are wearing different? Maybe I shouldn't ask that question. But don't we all, we change our clothes, right? We change our clothes. We wear different clothes than we wore yesterday. We washed our hands before we had breakfast. We freshened ourselves up. We combed our hair. I didn't comb my hair. I'll have to confess I didn't do that today. I haven't done that for an awfully long time. But, we look after ourselves. We look after ourselves. We love ourselves who we are. Sometimes we don't like ourselves, but really inside, we do really love ourselves as to who we are. And Jesus says the way you are to love yourself, that's how you're to love other people. And notice Jesus didn't say just love your friends, the people you get along with, the people you connect with. He said, love who? Everyone. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So who's your neighbor? Well, you see, the people you're sitting next to or behind or in front of, those are different people than you would probably classify as your normal friends. They're not the people that you really like to hang out with and get together for a birthday party with. They may be some of those people, but they might also be a different group. And Jesus calls us to love everybody because everybody is hurting. Everybody has faced abuse. Everybody has faced discouragement. Everybody's faced depression. Everybody's faced some form of suffering or pain or brokenness or whatever in our lives. But you say, well, wait a second here. I know some people that are really abrasive. They are tough on the outside. They just, they give you the old, you go, how you doing? Or whatever, right? They come across as, don't talk to me. Like, why are you talking to me? Or they come across as very distant or not just nice. There's those kind of people you come in contact with. And oftentimes we ask them, oh, how you doing? Huh? And then we're going, okay, not talking to that person again. And we steer clear of them. We're going, fine. You don't want to be nice to me? You don't want to even say hi to me? I don't need to be nice to you. But that's not what that verse means. Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Just because you woke up this morning and had a bad morning, does that mean you divorced yourself because you didn't like yourself this morning? You had a rough sleep and you woke up and you're going, oh man, and you're angry with your spouse, you're angry with your family, you're angry with whoever walked in the church this morning, you were abrasive with them. Does that mean that all of a sudden you're going, well, okay, now I'm going to just cut myself off from myself because I don't like myself today? No, we don't. And that's no more different than that kind of person. When we bump into somebody who we don't like and who puts up a wall between us, that doesn't mean that we just going, okay, I'm never going to talk to that person again. No, Jesus says love them. Jesus says love them. And let me put it this way. He says love them with no strings attached. About 20 years ago, we were in Calgary. I don't remember if I ever told this story, but we were in Calgary and we had a neighbor, one of our neighbor ladies there. I have no idea. We'd moved into this little community. I was landscaping. I was between churches. And this neighbor lady just, for whatever reason, didn't like us. And she made it known that she didn't like us. And she didn't want us in the community, in this neighborhood, and yada. And we're just going like, we just moved in here. You don't even know us. We lived in Maple Ridge out in Lower Mainland. We moved to Calgary. We were just there a little while, and she did not like us, and she made it known that she didn't like us. So I did what guys usually do is I just won't talk to her. That's I did the normal thing. But my wife is far more gracious and far more kind. And so she loves to do this, and she loves to give cookies away. And some of you have experienced her cookies. So she made up a plate of cookies and gave them away. And I think she sent one of the kids over because I didn't really want to go. And I don't think she wanted to go. So how can you see? But anyways, this neighbor lady got a couple plates of cookies from us, and that was about the end of the conversation. A few months later goes by, and all of a sudden I was laid off. I'd been out of a job for about a month by then, I think. It was getting close to Christmas time. And one day, the doorbell rings. And here's this lady standing there. She goes, "Oh, you're home." And I'm going, okay. The wall comes up, right? Guard is up. And she says, "Here, we have a whole bunch of gifts for your kids because we know that you've been without work for a while. And we have a whole basket of goodies, of like a food hamper kind of thing." I mean, we'd used up our savings, but I didn't think God was going to use this woman who had been very abrasive to us and very distant to us to reach out and love on us in that way. But she had. All because somebody gave her a couple of plates of cookies. You see, that's the kind of love. Love tears down walls. Listen to what Jesus said. I mean, even people that are enemies, like this lady was, God says, no, you can tear those down. Listen to what Jesus says here in Luke chapter 6. He says, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." Bless those who curse you. Bless those who have wronged you. Bless those who have abused you physically, emotionally, even sexually or spiritually, whatever. Bless them. God just doesn't tell us to love on them and just to kind of put up with them. He says, I want you to bless them. Bless your enemies. Bless those that have mistreated you. That's hard. Isn't that hard? Have you ever had people that have... There's people in my life that have hurt me deeply. A number of times. But to love on them, I can put up with them, and usually I just cross the street when I come near them. But that's not what this verse says. The verse doesn't say, cross the street when your enemies come near. No, he says, bless them. And those who curse you, pray for them. Those who mistreat you, honor, find ways of loving on them. The world says something different. They say, you don't need to put up with that junk. You only want positive thoughts and positivity in your life, so just ignore them and find other people that... No, that's not God's way of doing things. God calls us to a way higher standard because God has big things in store, not for us so much as he does for the people that he wants to touch and reach out to, whether they be people from here or people from other parts of the world. I mean, in our body here, we have people here from many nations, many places. We're all different. We have, 10 or 9, 10, 11 different countries represented in our church body. But God loves it because we get together and he wants us to love one another even though we have different differences. And Paul understood that. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul says these words here. He says, though I am free and I belong to no one, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became one like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that all possible ways I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. What's Paul saying there? Think about it for a minute. One day he's reaching out to a Jew. So guess what he's doing? He's eating the right kinds of foods. He's acting the right kind of way. He's even offering sacrifices. He's even going through purification rites. Why? Because he's trying to win the Jews. He's becoming everything he possibly can to the Jew. But the next day, he runs into some people that aren't Jews. They're from Asia Minor. They got some different kinds of traditions. They eat pork. They have all these different things. Guess what? Paul says, okay, today I eat pork. Yesterday, I wouldn't touch it. Today I eat pork. I'm not making a big deal about it. He goes, I'm not telling anybody I'm doing that. I'm not telling my friends, the Jews, that I'm eating pork over here because they won't understand me. But hey, over here, I'm going to do it because that's how I connect with those people. The interesting thing about Paul is Paul, think about it for a moment. When you think about this, is Paul became everything to everybody but never crossed the line when in breaking, compromised his relationship with God. Some people feel, well, in order to understand a sinner, I got to become a sinner. No, you don't got to sin in order to identify with a sinner. We've all sinned. That's understanding. All of us have faced loss of different kind. God never calls us to go and lose our spouse so that I can identify with someone else who has lost their spouse, or lose a parent because someone else has lost their parent. We don't have to engage into sin in order to help people identify with them. Becoming all things to all people does not mean we engage into sin. But it does mean we have to understand what is sin and what is cultural and what is experiential. And that's where Paul understood that aspect of doing things. Sometimes we say, well, I got to go and I have to get drunk to be able to identify with those that are drunk. That's not what God's calling you to do. Because those people who are in that state, how are they going to see the goodness of God in you if they can't see who God has made you to be? God does not call us to compromise who we are and what He's called us to do. He wants us to make sure we understand what that standard is. He doesn't want us to go out and sin, but He does want us to love on them. Not in a self-righteous way. Doesn't want us to become self-righteous and look down on people, because it's not about us. It's never about us. It's about the people that God calls us to love. And every time we draw attention to ourselves, that's wrong. God never calls us to be critical or judging or self-righteous or anything like that. God calls us none of those things. He calls us to love. He calls us to serve. He calls us to humble ourselves and find ways that would break down those barriers that we have put up or that other people have put up between us and them. And trust me, we all put up barriers. We all have barriers, walls that we put up. And God says, it's time to tear the walls down, because that's what Jesus says, that's what I came to do. I came to tear down the walls. I came to tear them down because I came to bring life. I came to bring hope. I came to bring peace. In this series called Home Improvement, one of the things that we have to do is the best way to improve your home is to, sometimes you got to renovate. Sometimes you got to tear down some walls. And guess what? God's calling us to tear down the walls between us and our neighbors, between us and the people we connect with, between us and the people that are within the church, between us and the people outside the church. We got to tear the walls down. We've often talked about having a church with windows in it rather than walls. You know what? We need not to have windows. We need to have doors, because God's calling us to go out into the world and to love on people out there. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we love people? That's where the conversation between you and Jesus gets interesting. Because you're saying, Jesus, what do you want me to do? The question is, and the other question is, who? Ask Jesus, Jesus, open my eyes to people around me that you want me to love. Regardless of how abrasive, how angry, how ugly they might seem on the inside, outside, whatever. Who do you want me to love? Who do you want me to love? Then what do you want me to do? Plate of cookies, maybe a coffee, maybe a meal, maybe cut their grass, maybe talk over the fence, maybe offer help of some kind. I don't know. There's 10,000 things God could ask you to do. But be available to love. and to love those that are tough. Don't go looking for tough people unless God brings them to you. Okay? But find those people, just be open, saying, God, maybe help me to love those that are maybe a little bit easy, not too hard to love to start with. So I at least kind of get some experience in this. But if he brings somebody that's tough across your path, believe him that he's going to use you and step in and love them. I was reading this week in Joshua, a little bit later than the passage that Palsky read from. And in Joshua, I think it's chapter 6, where they talk about Joshua. God tells Joshua, okay, I want you to go, I want you to attack Jericho, and you're going to wipe them out. And so God says, okay, Joshua, take the army, I want you to march around the walls once. So they get everybody up, everybody's all lined up. Priests are up front. Away they go. They don't say anything, they said. The trumpets are blowing, but nobody says anything, and they march around this wall. And they come back to camp. Everyone goes, what was that? How are we going to tear down the walls? Marching around the walls? That's doing nothing. Day 2. Oh, they think, maybe today. Line up, everybody. Away we go. Around the wall again. Come back to camp. We're supposed to take the land by walking around the place. Day 3. Day 4. Day 5. Day 6. What do you think was going through their minds by day 6? Like what? Bang, bang. I mean, what are we doing? Banging our head against the wall? It seems totally useless. Ludicrous. How is that going to happen? Day 7, they get up and they're going, yeah, right, here we go, one more walk. This time Joshua says, no, not once, 7 times. We're going, okay, we've already marched around 6 times, so how is 7 times in a row going to change things? And they do it 7 times. And then Joshua says, when I tell you to shout, you shout. And what happened? The walls came down. It takes time. Walls don't drop in a day. We think of our own life. How long has God been working in us? How long has God been working in our lives? Ripping out the stuff that he doesn't like in our lives. For me, it's been decades. It's been decades. God's been slowly chipping away. Sometimes it's been little things coming off. Sometimes there's been like icebergs that have broken away from my life. And we can't expect anything different than the people that God calls us to love. You guys have put up with me for 7 years now. And you haven't kicked me out.
He wants us to love you.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe next year, yeah. But that's the whole thing, is it takes time. I told you a few weeks ago about how God had called me to pray for a particular couple, friends of ours, and for their marriage and for their lives and where they were going. And over 10 years, God asked me to pray for them. And trust me, there was times in the middle there where I'd go, God, I give up. I don't see any change. I do not see any change. And for a month or 2, I would quit praying for them. And yet, a month or 2 would go by and God would say, no, I want you to pray. I'm going, oh, really? Nothing's happening. I'm walking around the wall. Nothing's happening. God kept saying, no, keep praying. That happened at least probably 3 times in that 10 plus years. And then this summer, God began to work. It was unbelievable. Messy, yet unbelievable. And I'm still praying. I'm praying more now for them than ever because God is beginning to do stuff in their lives. And I don't know, I don't know what he's going to do, But the fact that God has told me for over 10 years to keep praying for them, I'm thinking God's got something. Wouldn't that sit with you? That gives me hope that God's still working. So don't give up. Don't give up. Keep loving people. Keep doing what God tells you to do until God tells you to stop doing it. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes you're going, I've done with it. I've been doing that thing for how long? And nothing has changed. And yet God says no. If God brings it back to your mind, step into it. Because you know that something's going to happen. You know that something's going to happen. And next week we're going to continue in this, and we're going to talk more about how do we know that God's working, and when do we step into believing that He's working. This loving people is probably one of the hardest things we will ever do in our lives. Because God calls us to love with no strings attached. No expectations. No expectations. Because God may allow us to plant a seed, and then we walk away, and 10 years later, somebody else gets to enjoy the harvest. Do you realize how many times Jesus healed people? Yet how many people were really following Him when He died on the cross? There was no one left. There was a few that came back afterwards. There was 120 in the upper room that were praying. But Jesus had planted thousands and thousands of seeds. He'd healed thousands and thousands of people. He'd loved on hundreds and hundreds of people. Thousands of people. 5,000 got fed one day, 4,000 another day, plus kids. It was tens of thousands of people Jesus loved on. Those were seeds. Those were seeds. And the harvest came the day of Pentecost. And afterwards. Jesus never saw the harvest in when He walked the face of the earth. Peter got to see it. James got to see it. John got to see it. The disciples got to see it. Jesus never saw it in the flesh. But He had to believe that loving on people for the 3.5 years He walked around, that somehow His Father would take those seeds He planted and use them for and someone else would reap the harvest. That's what God calls us to do, is love. Love on people. And the way we love, you know why we can love on Him? Is because He loved us first. Jesus loved us first. He gave His life for us. That's why we get to celebrate communion. Jesus loved on us first. He sacrificed Himself for us. He gave Himself in the most unbelievable ways so that we could have life and we could express that love to other people. Jesus wants to love people. He wants to love the nations of the world. He wants to love the First Nations. He loves the Samoans. He loves the Belizeans and the Mexicans and the Brazilians and the Filipinos and He loves all of those people. Tongans too, and Chileans, and the Hutterites, and the Mennonites. Don't want to leave anybody out. And the Canadians. He loves us all. And He calls us to love everyone. Because He loved us first. Today, as you partake in the communion in a few minutes, I'm going to invite the elders to come forward. We're going to serve you. Realize as you hold that bread and as you hold the cup in your hand, realize the demonstration of God's love for you. That God loves you so very, very much. And because of that love, He's calling you to love others. He's calling you to love others. Lead us in worship, Paki. Then I'll hold on to the elements. You're going to receive them. Hold on to them. Hang on to them. I'll pray. And then you can partake together. We'll partake together.